Thus, what I did was I analyzed Bizzle's entire coaching session with Sway, as well as some other coaching VODs from pros like Bugha and Kanata, and highlighted the best takeaways from each match. These include topics such as when to rotate, why the timing of your loot route is important, and even how to stop getting tunnel vision in the late game. So without further ado, let's get right on into the video. To start off, I guess we'll go in chronological order with an example from the early game. As we see here, Bizzle is landing at his normal spot, the Ghost Henchman base outside of Weeping Woods, when he accidentally takes damage from the laser. I don't have the audio for it because it is copyrighted, but Bizzle actually gets pretty aggravated that he got hit. Why? Well, as Reddit user JRushFN points out, it's not because he loses health. Bizzle knows he can easily find a medkit or go to a nearby campfire to get back to full HP. The real reason he was so pissed off was that he lost 10 seconds of time. 10 seconds is exactly how long it will take for Bizzle to pop a medkit, which is 10 seconds he no longer has to loot, farm, or scout for his opponents. That's why he was so dang pissed off. Now, why this is so interesting is that it shows how profound Bizzle's game sense truly is, especially regarding his opponent's rotations and the timing he must follow to avoid early game engagements. Every time Bizzle jumps off the battle bus, he has a clear plan in mind of how he's going to play out the early game. He knows what his ideal loadout should be, where he can get the max amount of materials and loot, and most importantly, when exactly he needs to get those things by. If he is just 5 seconds off the specific time he gives himself to rotate, then he's at risk of ruining his entire match. I don't know about you guys, but that's something I rarely ever think about in arena or scrims. Most of the time, I'm just going through the motions and scrambling to find loot and farm more. What I only just realized though is that spending extra time trying to loot, therefore causing you to be late to rotate, is way worse than having not as good of an AR or less than max mats. You can always loot up more after you're based up in center circle. That's why you'll often see Bizzle skip over floor loot spawns or not farm nearby objects on his way to zone. It's not that he didn't see them or was distracted by Twitch chat, rather it's because he was able to remind himself of the valuable time he lost, and as a result, adjusted his loot route accordingly. So if it hasn't been made clear already, the takeaways are as follows. First, make sure you're aware of all the landing spots near you and when those players will finish looting. This way you can plan your own time loot route around them. Second, practice thinking realistically in-game rather than emotionally to plan out your immediate next steps, as well as a long-term game plan. Moving on to our mid-game examples, even though they can kind of be counted as late-game ones, and we're joined on board with the controller god, Innocence. During his entire qualifier, Innocence was getting coached by Tfue, but I think it's important to note, I'm going off Bugha's interpretation of the play. Anyways, Innocence is in a normal-sized lobby, about 20 people or so for the moving zone, and is deciding on how to rotate. He actually asks Tfue if he should use his launch pad. Tfue says no, so he decides to build his way in over the water. As that's happening, however, Bugha is watching this all unfold and begging Innocence to use his launch pad. When asked why, he basically explained that the first moving zone is the most important one to save your mats on. This is because it's the initial moving zone, aka the one with the most people left alive for it, and it has the biggest circle, therefore being the safest to rotate via launch pad. Notice how Innocence started the entire play with over 700 mats, yet after he uses his launch pad for the second moving zone, one zone too late, he ends up with only 100. Had he just launch padded the first moving zone like Bugha said to, he could have boxed up and gone the same distance on foot for the second rotation by only using half that amount of mats. Instead, he made the wrong decision and was forced to get aggressive to refresh his mats, ultimately resulting in his death. Now, before we get to the big takeaways, I just want to show this other clip I saw on Bugha's stream just a few minutes after the Innocence one from Asian Jeff. Asian Jeff, who is a pretty well-known creative player, is getting coached by Clix when he's put in the same exact position as Innocence. He has a launch pad, he has to rotate across the zone, and it's actually the first moving one. The main difference though is Clix makes the right call to launch pad the first moving, and Asian Jeff ends up not wasting all of his mats. The part I wanted to focus on was what happens for the second moving zone. Circle is pretty far away from him, and he decides to cut through the middle of the safe zone in order to get there. He protects himself decently well, but since he's within everyone else's line of sight, he ends up getting sprayed to death. What he should have done instead, as Bugha pointed out, is rotate southwest behind all the builds that are already there. Everyone on that side was moving on their feet and rotating in the same direction Bugha said to. All Asian Jeff needed to do was follow them in while protecting his back. However, because he disregarded those opponents rotating to his right, he ended up rotating way too quickly and dying. So for the takeaways, first, always try to use your launch pad during or before the first moving zone. Any zone after that is way too small and dangerous to be launch padding, plus you won't have enough mats if you waste them all rotating on foot. Then second, if you do end up launch padding and have a lot of materials for the next moving zone, do not waste them for no reason. Just because you made the right decision for one zone does not mean you're invincible and cannot make the wrong decision for the next one. Simply chill out, plan the safest and most mat efficient rotation, and do your best to stick to it. Do not, and I repeat, do not count on your mechanics to carry you out of bad rotates, because even Fei Sui, who you will see in a minute, can't outbuild the entire server spraying at him. For the next example, we're gonna go to the real late game, and as I just said, we're gonna analyze Fei Sui. In this clip, Sui can be seen sitting on high ground and pressuring everyone below him with his AR. He's got about 400 mats, a ridiculous amount of ammo, an amazing loadout. He's basically in the best spot to win the game. All he's gotta do is survive and keep spraying all the people on low ground. Unfortunately for Sui though, his creative instincts kick in and he drops down to try and rack up the remaining players. He does almost kill one of them, but gets deleted off the face of the earth by someone in zone with a drum gun. RIP to the kills he missed out on, and RIP to the extra points from the win. Outside of Sui dropping down from high ground, the bigger mistake he made was being unaware of the people inside the storm. You see, as Sui started to get aggressive, Bizzle kept telling him there were still 6 other people alive. Sui ignored him because he only saw 2 other people in zone, and due to his inexperience and competitive, wrote the remaining players off as dead. Bizzle on the other hand, who has been in that situation hundreds if not thousands of times, assumed those players were healing in zone with floppers, and as we just saw, he was right. But what if those players were actually dead and Sui won the game? Do you think it then would have been a good decision? Hopefully you said no, because it would not have. Way too many players, including myself, see a poorly made decision pay off, and only because it did not result in something bad happening, will they start to think it was the right one. If you're trying to be as consistent as Bizzle or Mr. Savage, that is the wrong mindset to have. Simply because a play resulted in a kill does not mean you should have made it in the first place. You constantly have to be thinking about the worst outcome that could have happened and make your decision based around that happening. Sui did not account for that, as he completely forgot about flopper players, and it resulted in him throwing the match. So I won't do an ending takeaway for that example since I just said it, but my parting message is to make all your decisions based on the worst possible outcomes, aka play safe. To wrap up the video, I'm going to talk about how you can improve your own game sense. I've talked about this a few times in the past and gave you guys advice to VOD review and play scrims. Still, many of you guys have told me that it hasn't really helped. One decently new way to improve your game sense that I personally love using is to go into replays and predict how you'd personally play out the match. To do that, go to the Compete tab, over to any of the major FNCS or Cash Cup events, and click on whichever pro you want to watch. Then hit the match history button and you can choose from any of the games they played out. This will put you directly into replay mode from their perspective, where you can choose to watch their gameplay or do what I like to do and watch the battle map option. I'm pretty sure this is a new feature, as I don't remember it ever being a thing in the past. Regardless, it's awesome. You can see all the zones on the map as well as the exact rotation paths the pro you're spectating went. Another thing I'll do, which you can accomplish within the same exact replay, is hit my map button and predict how the congestion for each zone will be distributed. For example, I'll skip ahead to the 3rd or 4th zone, and only based on the direction of the battle bus, I'll guess which side of the zone will have the most people in it. This way, in game, I'll be able to know where to position myself in order to avoid other players and have easier rotates. Lastly, and not using the replay system, I'll ask questions when I'm in a pro player's chat, essentially getting them to talk about their thought process. Don't ever be afraid to ask questions and get your teammates or your favorite streamers to explain their decision making. The more knowledge you have, the more informed your own decisions will be, and the smarter you will become as a Fortnite player. Overall guys, those are the most important game sense tips I have for Chapter 2 Season 2. To recap, remember to plan and adjust your early game loot route depending on who lands near you. Always use your launch pad for or before the first moving zone. Do not waste your mats trying to rotate on foot when you don't have to, and make sure you're aware of the worst outcome that can happen, then form your game plan around it. On top of that, to practice your game sense, go into replay mode to predict rotations and congestion levels, and like I just said before, ask people you play with to explain their decision making. So if you guys enjoyed the video or you learned something new, do be sure to drop a like, subscribe to the channel, and to turn on post notifications.